It's the Brad and John Show.
It is the Brad and John Show. Today is May 14th, 2025. This is the B block, which means we started right around 7:20 or so. John, we finished up the A block by talking about Christopher Kit Bond. And interesting couple different footnotes. The youngest governor ever in the state of Missouri. You know how old he was when he was elected governor?
I'm going to guess 34, because I think Fatty Matty Blunt was 33.
No, he was actually 33. He was the youngest.
Oh, okay. There you go.
You almost had it. Now, the interesting part of this is that, and here we go again. John's going to make fun of me when I read this. But the interesting part of this is one of the footnotes in history is there was a Supreme Court decision involving him being governor. And because of the fact that at the age of 33, if I believe the way it works is, or here's right here, Kit Bond. With the state of Missouri, the ruling is that you have to be a resident of the state of Missouri for 10 years previous to you being elected. Does that sound right to you, John?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. And here was it, Eller political career. I thought I had this.
And so Kit Bond went to, I'll finish it for you, Brad. Kit Bond went to Princeton, and then he Virginia, and then he worked in Washington, D.C. before moving back to Missouri. So opponents made a deal of the fact that he did not have residency for 10 years. And the court ruling was that you have to have the intention of moving back to your state. And if you have the intention of moving back to your state, then you're fine.
The court sided with him, commenting that residency is, quote, largely a matter of intention and did not require actual physical presence. Is that some BS ruling or what?
And you know, last summer we talked a lot about this, Brad. You and I did on the air, because Mike Hamra was a gentleman running in the Democratic primary for governor and against Crystal Quaid. And Mike Hamra had moved for several years and lived in Chicago and identified as a Chicago native. He voted, not as a native, but as a Chicago resident. He voted in elections in Chicago. He was part of the Chicago community and then wanted to come back to Missouri. Now, it was a moot point because Crystal Quaid won the Democratic primary. But Mike Hamra brought this issue to prominence again last summer.
The official ruling further states that, quote, residency is a place where a man has his true, fixed, and permanent home and principal establishment, and to which, whenever he is absent, he has the intention of returning. I mean, it's that gobbledygook or what? Essentially, John, did you know I was your next door neighbor? Did you know I lived next to you?
Well, you're not going to be able to afford to move into my neighborhood, but you have every intention to. I could build a shed out here.
So the interesting part of this is that if you go to register for election and they say, where do you live? Well, I actually live here, but my intention is to live in Ladue. So register me in 63124. Well, no, hold on a minute now. Where do you live right now? Where I live in North County. But you want to be a registered voter in Ladue? Yes, because the Supreme Court said place.
You have, and I think that's fair, Brad. I think that there's a lot of Brad Hildebrands on the sidelines that don't like that idea. But I think that as long as you say, hey, I don't live in the district, but I plan on moving there, then the voters can make a choice. The voters can say, okay, do we want this guy from North County representing us in Ladue or not? And voters have a choice in that.
Well, it's just like the same thing with the Josh Hawley thing. Now, do you know that, where he ran afoul of the Missouri Constitution when he was the Attorney General? Do you know that story?
Yeah, go ahead and explain that again, Brad.
Well, the Missouri Constitution says that the Attorney General must be a resident of Jefferson City. And he was not. He lived in Boone County. He lived on a farm or something like that. And when they brought that up to him, once again, he's the Attorney General. He's the guy who's supposedly, watching over our constitutional rights in the state of Missouri. And he just, I'm not going to, that one, just throw that rule out. We don't need to pay attention to that. He didn't live in Jefferson City like the Constitution said he had to. And his response was, well, that's actually old because of the fact in the old days, you had to physically be in the capital to take care of business. Now you can be anywhere and take care of business. Okay, whatever, dude. You know what I mean? It's just like,
I think it goes to show that if in 2018 you had met Josh Hawley and he had tossed $1,000 worth of advertising your way, you would not have spent the last 7 years criticizing Josh Hawley.
No, I see. I have a problem with I think this is one of the things I have with the holier than thou political class that, it's funny. I didn't bring this up over the weekend, someone brought up the Ricky Schroer thing where he lived in some lady's basement in O'Fallon. Remember that crazy, weird story?
I do remember that. Yeah, and you're talking about State Senator Nick Schroer of the Defiance area, right?
Right, exactly. And the interesting part of that was it's a weird story, is that he claims he has a disabled child. One of his kids is disabled, and he lived in the Fort Zumwalt School District, but he claims that they didn't have the proper special education for, I think it was his daughter in Fort Zumwalt. So he moved his wife down into the Defiance area, down south of Highway 40 off of 94, so he could be in the Francis Howell School District, okay? But yet, to retain his job as a Missouri state representative, he rented the basement of some lady's house in O'Fallon. Remember this crazy story?
I do, yeah.
But the interesting part of it was, I ran into, at the time, the guy who was the superintendent for the Fort Zumwalt School District, who has since retired, and I asked him. I said, can I ask you a question about Ricky Schroer? And he says, do you mean Nick Schroer? And I go, yeah, that's the guy. And I said, what program did you not have that he had to move his kid into Francis Howell? And I will not tell you what he said because it involved a couple of expletives, which I was sort of interested in hearing coming from, at that point in time, the superintendent of the Fort Zumwalt School District, essentially saying, that's BS. We had the same program. Ours was better than Francis Howell. So the whole point of it was he's just going to, pull strings and say, I'm going to, and then, they came out with the fact that he lived in a basement and he didn't have a bathroom and he went and shared a bathroom with the two old ladies upstairs. I have a problem with that. I really do. If you're gonna play the holier than thou card.
You're suggesting that you're saying that Nick was lying about a situation involving his kid's education because he was lying about residency. That's what you're saying.
Well, if you remember the story, the Democrats hired a private detective, and they had pictures of his truck parked overnight at his house in Defiance. He wasn't staying at some place in O'Fallon. It was a joke. Yeah. And see, to me, this is the thing where you go like, okay, see, the problem I have is if you're going to put yourself out as a lawmaker, as you're like above and beyond, this is the thing for me in religion, okay? Look at Jesus Christ, okay? I kid about this all the time, and this is Pastor Brad putting on his little pastor collar, okay? People talk about WWJD. It's not as big as it used to be. What would Jesus do? You're supposed to ask yourself, what would Jesus do this? Would Jesus do this? I modify that a little bit, and I say, where would Jesus worship? WWJW. I say instead of him being at like the big fancy schmancy Grace Church or the big the Church on the Rock and St. Peter's, all that stuff, that you'd find Jesus at the Greyhound bus station. You'd find him at the homeless encampment, down the street from where Larry Rice used to be. And to the point where if you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk. And if you're going to, put yourself above everybody else, make sure you're absolutely positively clean slate, okay? I am a sinner on many levels, okay? I admit that. There's things I do on a daily basis that I'm thinking to myself, I shouldn't be doing this, but yet I do it, okay? And it's to the point where, but I don't put myself out as, I'm Brad Hildebrand. I'm a wonderful guy. My life's perfect. Everything about me is perfect. Elect me to office. I will make your house look better. I'll come and paint your house for you. We'll put a new roof on your house when I get elected. I was just kidding about all that stuff. You know what I'm saying, John?
Yeah, and so let's get back to an interesting topic, which would be, you said that, which is true. I mean, folks had Democrats, I believe Democrats, or at least political opponents had people following Nick Schroer and taking pictures of that. And then voters got a chance to weigh in on Nick Schroer. And did they elect him or not?
Well, you could say the same thing about a lot of politicians.
Did he get elected?
Yeah, of course he did.
Okay, I remember, Brad, I'm old enough to remember a few years ago reading residency stories in every major newspaper and progressive blog. And it seems like the people in Nick Schroer's district wanted him to represent them, right?
Well, his whole deal was he had his eyes on the Senate seat, and it didn't make a difference where he was O'Fallon, because I think the Senate seat encompasses his old house and his new house as well too.
And so I'm pretty sure the people of his district voted to elect him. So that seems pretty good. And neither you nor I live in his district, right?
I don't know. I do not. But John, let's take it one step further. Okay, let's say that they find out that Dan Borgmeyer lives in O'Fallon. Dan Borgmeyer is the mayor of St. Charles, and people go like, "Well, Dan, you don't live in St. Charles. You're the mayor." Well, you know what? I intend to live in St. Charles, but I found a nicer house in O'Fallon. But go ahead and reelect me again. I mean, I get what you're saying, and the problem with this is most of the people go to the polls and they have no idea who they're voting for. They are, as Rush Limbaugh coined the term, low information voters. They have no idea. I mean, to the point where, remember the crazy thing is that Jay Leno used to do with street walking, where he'd go out in the street and he'd say, "Hey, who's the vice president?" People would say, like, it's Elmo Farnsworth. Who? That kind of thing. Okay, I bet that if I came into your neighborhood, or we picked a place like in St. Charles County, or we went out to Dave Schatz and we had, our receipts in the back of our car and we dropped them off, at the Franklin County Courthouse. And right there in downtown Union, or in downtown St. Charles, or in downtown O'Fallon, wherever, and you did the man on the street and you say, "Hey, do you live in O'Fallon?" "Yes, I do." "Who's your state rep?" "I don't know." "Who's your state senator?" "I don't know." "Who's the mayor of O'Fallon?" "I don't know." That's 80% of the voting public.
I think that's a shame. And so you started off this block, Brad, with making a great point about that Supreme Court ruling. And so that's one of the other legacies of Kit Bond, right? Like the Supreme Court weighed in and said, as long as you have the intention of moving into a district, then you're squared away.
Which is BS, John. Let's be honest. I mean, that's the Supreme Court ruling. It's to the point where it's laughable. I mean, that would, let's take it on a national level. Let's say we have Elon Musk who wants to run for president, and the Constitution says, well, he can't because he's not a native-born American. But Elon could come on TV and say, well, I intend to be a native-born American. I intended my entire life to be a native-born American. Oh, okay. Well, if you intended to be a native-born American.
Now, that one there would seem to be a stretch, I think, Brad. I think we could agree on that.
No, I don't think so. If you can intend on, if you say that you've lived in Virginia for 6 years, but you said, well, I really intended to live in Missouri. And what's the line again? Let me read it again. Okay, here's the Elon Musk line. Here it is. The court ruled that residency was that place where a man has his true, fixed, and permanent home and principal establishment, and to which, whenever he is absent, he has the intention of returning. So Elon Musk could say, I live in the United States, and I'm a native-born citizen because I intended to be born in the United States. And, Mr. Musk, you're right. You intended to be born in the United States. So, therefore, you can run for president, right?
Yeah, I think so. And so... Yeah, I mean, Brad, I don't know what more to say about that. I think that, your position on the intention is clear. And so this is your way of saying that you're going to run for office in Ladue, right? Is this your official rollout?
John, I would never be elected to anything because of the fact that I just can't play those games. I just can't play those games. I just can't. I mean, it would bother me till the day I died that, because of the fact that, and I'm not trying to say that politicians are all pretty much cut from the same piece of cloth, but to a certain extent they are. I mean, it's a lot about ego. It's a lot about, it's like the Bernie Sanders thing. My youngest son, who I've told you is a Bernie Sanders fan, okay? As a matter of fact, it's interesting. This is one of my things to talk about this morning. Okay, you ready for this?
I am.
We talked about the fact that Bernie Sanders, and remember, this is interesting about Bernie. Once upon a time, Bernie railed against the millionaires and the billionaires. If you notice, he no longer uses the term millionaires because you know why?
Because he's one of them now.
Yes, he's a millionaire. He has like 3 houses and the whole bit. Okay, so he was on Fox News last week with Bret Baier. I give him credit for the fact that he went in enemy territory and he was on Fox News. And Bret Baier asked him point blank about Don't you think it's hypocritical? You're the guy who's talking about climate change and all this, and yet you're flying all over the country in a private jet, railing against the oligarchs. And Bernie's like, well, what do you want? His exact quote was something like, what do you want me to do? Sit in line at an airport and waiting to board my plane in United? He can't be like you and I, John. He can't be,
No, of course not. Well, he has important rallies to go to, Brad. He has important socialist comrades to rally.
He's got important. Now, here's the article. I sent this to my son, who's a Bernie Sanders fan. And the headline is, Energy Watchdog exposes eye-popping carbon footprint of Sanders' jet-setting tour, fake socialist. And it goes on to talk about the fact that, and there's a statistic in here, here we go. During the 16 stops of the tour, which Sanders embarked on with the help of progressive Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, his private jet emitted a total of 62.15 tons, that's TONNEs, that's metric tons, of carbon dioxide, according to an estimate from Power the Future. To put that in perspective, Power the Future said in a press release that the emission equates to burning 62,000 pounds of coal, driving a gas-powered SUV 150,000 miles, powering every home in Sanders' hometown in Burlington, Vermont for weeks, and powering 9 U.S. homes for an entire year. That's how much pollution he put out by jet-setting around the country to fight against oligarchs. So I send this to my son. This is pretty funny. And I've talked at length about my son. My son is a Bernie Sanders dyed-in-the-wool fan. And why? Because of the fact that my son has told me. The reason he loves Bernie Sanders is my son doesn't like to work. He works. When he shows up for work, he's an excellent employee. This is the bizarre thing with my son. You talk to any people that have worked with my son at jobs, they love my son. He's a great worker, but he hates to go to work. He just doesn't like to. He just goes through the motions, does his job, goes home. All he wants to do is sit at home, play video games. So I sent this to my son, and his response was, it's too late for the old boy. Deb stabbed him in the back. We'll just have to wait for the next Larry David impersonator. So,
oh, look at that! Hey, at least your son has a sense of humor, right?
He does, but it's interesting. He also sent me. This is interesting. He sent me. This is my son. An article, and the article's titled. This is out of The Guardian, and the article is titled, "Richest 1% account for more carbon emissions than the poorest 66%. So, in other words, the rich people, the 1%ers who live in like Ladue and Frontenac and Town and Country and Chesterfield and Wildwood, those people are putting out more pollution than the 66 lower percentile of the people. And once again, Bernie's one of those 1%ers. He's a 1%er. Do you know, I think the current deal right now is that to be a 1% of the United States, and I remember reading this not too long ago. Do you know what the annual salary is if you're considered to be a 1% of the United States now is?
I have no idea. What is it?
It's like $275,000. So if you make...
Oh, wow. Now, when they say 1%, are they talking about income or net assets?
Income. I mean, you and I can talk about the net worth, all that stuff, and how, the teachers, even though they claim they get low paid, they're the number 3 millionaire according to Dave Ramsey. That's a whole other story. But as far as their salary, if you just take what their salary is, the amount of money they make per year, if you make, it used to be like like about $140,000, $150,000 back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now it's more. But if you make $250,000 a year, you're in the 1%er. So if you are like a baseball player who's like, getting a huge paycheck from the Cardinals and things like that, you're in the like 0.0001%. You know what I mean? And Bernie Sanders is a 1%er. But yet he's this socialist guy. And once again, the idea being is he says, he got asked this 4 years ago when he ran for president, and he got asked at a press conference when they said, Mr. Sanders, you're flying around the country. And he goes, what do you want me to do, walk? Hey, but we had a good example because we had Joe Biden who sat in his basement and he didn't fly around the country in his private jet. And guess what? He got elected president. So maybe there is hope for the people that just
That's true. And so they kind of even each other out, don't they, Brad?
Right. Whatever. Okay. We have to take a break. And we have other important things to talk about in the C block, which is coming up.